Good morning, everyone. This is John with Gun.Deals, and today we are going to be talking about the DNT Optics TNC225R ThermNight Thermal and Night Vision Multispectral Scope with Laser Rangefinder and Ballistic Calculator. The naming convention could be a little more catchy. But before we get into everything, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, as that is all free and does help us out quite a bit. And go ahead and comment your best idea for a better name for the TNC225R. Full disclosure on this optic is that DNT did reach out and see if we wanted to do a video on it, and I thought, well, it's novel enough and interesting enough to at least be worthy of discussion. So keep that in mind that we received it free of charge from the manufacturer. Getting into basics of the TNC225R, we have essentially a 4-in-1 unit or a 5-in-1 unit, depending on how you want to look at it. The main optic itself is a thermal rifle scope. Then strapped up top, we have a digital day and night vision scope. We also have a laser rangefinder with ballistic calculator built into the optic itself, and also an IR illuminator. So it is a ton of potential performance packed into a singular optic. Now, as you can see it here, it is quite big and bulky, but for all of that comes in at about 23 ounces, depending on what battery you go with. Starting off with the thermal part of the scope, this is the lowest end variation, coming in at a little under $1,500, which is quite expensive, of course, but this is the 225. So the sensor resolution for the thermal aspect is 256 by 192, and then it goes all the way up on the top tier models, all the way up to 648 or whatever it happens to be. That's the biggest top dollar sensor, but it's also roughly double the cost. The thermal optic has a base magnification of 3x, and then of course you can digitally enhance that, quote unquote, up to 12x, though the resolution is pretty sparse to begin with, so you're not going to want to use too much digital zoom if you want to maintain clarity. On the front of the optic, we have our focusing ring for dialing in the image as good as it can get. Up top, we have our digital day and night vision scope. The sensor resolution is 1080p, but the actual record resolution is 1024 by 768. And actually, the resolution on the digital day and night camera is much better than on the lower resolution thermal camera, so depending on what you're trying to buy this optic for, keep that in mind. Now, one of the interesting features on the entire TNC lineup is that they all come with a built-in laser rangefinder that works out to approximately 1,100 yards, that comes with a ballistic calculation system within the optic itself, and it gives you an active readout of whatever range that you're looking at as long as you have it turned on. Now, the last thing that we're not going to talk about too much is the IR illuminator. It is pretty powerful for a LED-based illuminator. They have the 850 head, which is currently on here, which is like the further throw head, and then they also have a 940, which has more of a flood spill effect, so I guess depending on what you're doing. And it is, again, it's a digital night vision scope, so it just is a night vision scope that can pick up the IR spectrum. It is in black and white, though in the day mode you have full color. So again, depending on what you're doing, it can kind of work for multiple things. Now, before we get into what it's like to actually use the thing, I do want to talk about the mount a little bit. You have 4 huge cross bolts that bolt the mount to the optic body, and then you have a pretty substantial locking block, recoil lug, and 3 cross bolts on the actual mount to your upper receiver. So it is a very strong mounting system. At the back of the optic, we have a fairly pixel-dense OLED screen that works pretty well. You can also focus it to work best for your specific set of eyes. On the right-hand side of the optic, we have a USB-C port, which is not for charging. It is for data transfer or for hooking up to an external power bank, because you might want that, especially for longer sessions, because battery life, especially if you're using all the settings at the same time, can be fairly low. I think they rate it at 5 hours, and that's probably a little bit optimistic depending on what you're doing. You also do have a built-in Picatinny mount on the right-hand side, so you could throw in an offset red dot if you really wanted to. I did have one on there for a little while for true, maximum capability, I guess you could say, and it does work if you just use it like an offset red dot, but for the main purpose of this, I don't think it's a fighting optic by any means, but it is an interesting combination of a bunch of different features that can work fairly well. So let's go ahead and talk about actual performance. As I mentioned, the lowest resolution sensor on the thermal camera at a base magnification of 3 is only okay. It's not terrible by any means, but if you get beyond 100 or 200 yards, things start to become very, very fuzzy and pixelated. So if you were thinking that you're going to be using this to pick off prairie dogs at 300-400 yards, you might be able to tell what they are or that they're there, but getting a very precise shot is going to be difficult with this low resolution of a sensor. Now, I should mention that with the thermal, you do have a bunch of different color modes, and you can cycle through them very quickly. And you can also cycle between your day and night modes, or your thermal and your digital camera modes, very easily just at the click of a button. Also, very nicely, they did include a picture-in-picture version. So you can simply hold down the button on the right and that will actually give you picture-in-picture. And you can actually customize exactly what that secondary display is. For instance, you can have the digital night vision along with the thermal or vice versa, or you can simply have a zoomed in version of the thermal or the night vision. So you can customize everything on it. In terms of settings, again, everything is adjustable from multiple different zeros on both of the day and night and the thermal optics. Now, they're not set together, so you do have to set the zeros separately, which can be a bit annoying. It does take a bit of time, but I do get why they do that, as you do have a bit of offset between your digital and your thermal, so you do need to zero them separately. I would personally push the zero out to at least 100 yards. I wouldn't use a shorter zero just because it's going to make everything the simplest. When we talk about using all of that in conjunction with the digital rangefinder and ballistic calculator, I didn't take it out to far enough ranges to ever need the ballistic calculator, but it is nice to see exactly what distances you're shooting at so you can calculate your offset. So for instance, if you're shooting again a small target at 256 yards, it's nice to know that you need to hold exactly 4 inches high depending on your specific zero. And while I certainly like having a ballistic rangefinder locked into the system itself, giving me a live readout of the distance that I'm shooting, I think that is very neat. It's not all that relevant out to extended ranges, as again, you're never going to be taking this out to distances where the ballistic calculator plus laser rangefinder live feed is going to be all that helpful. Now, you can set it up with different reticles, different colors, all the different stuff that you can do with the optic to give you a live drop, or to where it actually just physically moves the reticle for you depending on what distance you are aiming at. Now, personally, again, you're not going to be shooting out to 600 or 700 yards with an optic like this, purely because the resolution isn't all that great. The digital night vision with IR illuminator is good out to maybe a couple hundred yards, and in the daytime, you could certainly make shots out to 400, 500, or 600 yards, but I think that you are hampering your performance quite a bit by going with an optic like this. Again, the thermal, while it is useful and can certainly detect larger objects out to extended distances, getting good enough resolution to actually make a good impact on target is going to be quite difficult with that low resolution sensor. Inside of a couple hundred yards, I think it's more than usable enough for medium-sized targets, so it's really going to depend on your specific use case. But again, combining that with an active rangefinder and ballistic calculation within the software itself, while technically doable, is a bit optimistic. If we move back a bit to actually setting the optic up, there are so many different settings for everything. For instance, you can have up to 5 different saved zeros with the thermal and the digital optic as well. And you can change the reticles, you can change the colors, you can change the white hot, black hot, iron hot, whatever it happens to be for the thermal. For the digital, you can go from color to night vision. You can change all of the settings with the IR illuminator. I think you have 5 different power settings, which on max power settings, it drains the battery extremely quickly. So you're not really ever going to be getting that 5-hour battery life. And again, remember that you could do basically all of that at the exact same time. You can have thermal with digital picture-in-picture, with an active rangefinder, with an IR illuminator on at the same time if you really wanted to, and powering all of that is a single 18650 without the pin on the end, so it is a little bit of a shorter, it's the flat top version. Getting a lot of battery life out of it, probably not going to happen. Most of the time, honestly, it was easier just to hook it up to an external power bank with the USB Type-C and just run it off that, and that way there, I never had to worry about what the battery life was going to be because I was running it off of a huge battery bank that could run it for a exceedingly long period of time. So now when we talk about value, it's definitely a mixed bag because again, on paper, you have literally everything. Day, night, IR illuminator, active laser rangefinder, giving you a up-to-date live ballistic drop calculation within the reticle, and you have a thermal optic as well. So it can literally do anything. It's about as full spectrum as any of my viewers are. The problem is with the low-end model, which low-end in quotations, again, these are about $1,500 or less, is that while there is a lot of features there, the performance isn't quite good enough to really take full advantage of all of them. Now, again, they have 3 different models of this, the 225, the 335, and the 635, the 635 having the biggest, highest resolution sensor. That probably makes a little bit more sense, but again, that is at about double the cost of the 225. And then when we talk about the digital day-night optic, while it technically, again, does work, You have to worry about refresh rate with lag. There was also sometimes when I had everything running at the same time that the system would kind of be a little glitchy and stuttery and not quite smooth. Now, some of that is due to the thermal sensor having to dump every now and again, but sometimes it would just be a little bit laggier than I would like. So for static hunting environments inside of a couple hundred yards on medium-sized game, not bad. And again, having that picture in picture so that you can, if the thermal image isn't quite clear, you still have a digital readout of, whether it's night vision or daytime, whatever it happens to be, that can give you two different images at the same time to give you the most information possible. Very nice features to have. Having a ballistic or a laser rangefinder in the optic itself when you're aiming at different distances, kind of cool. Having the ability to record all of that in almost HD, also kind of neat. So as a gimmicky hunting optic, if you're doing pest control or something like that, maybe this is something that actually interests you. For instance, if you're having to harvest hogs on your property and you want something that can kind of flex into a bunch of different roles and allow you to record it, maybe something like this isn't terrible. If you're trying to take more precise shots at distance or for more serious application, I think you simply have to get something with a higher resolution thermal sensor. And if you get something with a little bit more powerful operating system that everything integrates a little bit better, I think that that's going to work better for you. So if you're looking at simply the cheapest option that does everything, this is that option from DNT. Would I personally spend my own money on this? No. I think personally, if I was looking at getting a thermal, fighting optic or whatever you want to call it, I would get rid of all of the extra stuff that you don't need off of it because I don't think it's really going to be that relevant to that application. Get the thermal optic with the best resolution sensor possible and, whatever other accoutrements and features that you want in some way to mount a top dot or a side dot and kind of be good to go there. That is obviously not this application. I think this is much more of a hobbyist, general purpose or hunting application optic and something that quite literally does everything. With all that out of the way, let me know what you think of the DNT TNC225R, and I'm not going to read off the rest of the name this time, but let me know what you think of all of that in the comments down below. And with all that out of the way, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Peace off.